On the 18th of February 1989, two rabbit hunters had decided to head home for the day as they were walking on the Earl of Stradbroke's estate off the A12. They came across what they thought initially was a mannequin. Kevin and Jordan had stumbled across the partially clothed and decomposed body of a murdered woman. A woman who had been dumped in a field for so long that rodents had eaten parts of her. I touched her with the end of my gun to see if it was fleshy, and it was, he recalled. It was just a body laying in the bottom of the ditch with bits of grass all around her, he said. Her top was open, there was a scratch across her chest. Her calves had been eaten away, and the meat off her fingers and face too. Her eyeballs were still there. They quickly ran to the nearest property to use the phone and contact the police. Police arrived shortly after, cordoning off the area and trying to maintain evidence. The partially decomposed body had been found in a ditch at Wangford, Suffolk. Police soon determined that it was a female. She was missing her coat, a shoe, her purse and jewellery. The body was taken by forensics to determine who it could belong to, and as police searched their missing persons lists, they soon discovered that 2 weeks previously, a woman by the name of Jeanette Kempton had gone missing and had still not been found. It was not long before the coroner was able to determine that this was the body of Jeanette, and she had been murdered by compression to the neck. Jeanette Kempton had been a 32-year-old mother and wife. Known to her friends as Jean, she lived in the Treherne Court in Brixton, in the area of South London. Jean lived with her two teenage sons. Jeanette and Paul had first met 17 years before, in 1972, when she was just 15 years of age. They fell in love and got married the next year. However, in the following years, Jeanette began suffering from depression and she started to drink heavily. Cracks began to appear in their relationship, and eventually they divorced in 1980. So in 1985, Paul returned to the family home to live with Jeanette and her two sons. So let's go back 2 weeks to when Jeanette, or as we will call her Jean, initially went missing. At 8:30 a.m. on the 2nd of February 1989, Jean was at home and her two boys were getting ready for school. Jean saw her boys off to school as usual. Now, Thursday was her ex-husband's day off, so the pair went shopping together on Brixton Road. After getting what they needed, the pair decided to pop into the Loughborough Hotel pub for a drink or two. Now, Jean liked to drink, often spending full afternoons in the pub drinking lager and lime. Now, when the pair started drinking, it was about 12:30 lunchtime, and they were the only couple in the pub that day, but they were soon joined by a friend, Jean's friend Trevor. He had just cashed a cheque for £300 and passed it to Jean, asking her to keep an eye on it for him. Jean asked Trevor if she could borrow a couple of pounds until Tuesday, to which Trevor agreed and told her to make sure that she gave him it back. Now, later that day, Jean's ex-husband decided to leave the pub to go and make the kids some dinner, leaving Jean still drinking in the pub. Her ex-husband later returned 3 hours after, but Jean was gone. Now, at 6 p.m, Jean and her friend Trevor walked over to the shop, only a few doors down from the pub, to collect a wreath that she'd had made for a funeral she was attending the following day. Jean thanked the shop lady so much, telling her what a wonderful job she had done making the wreath, before exiting the shop, and they went back to the Loughborough pub for more drinks. Jean wanted to go to another pub, saying she was sick of it in here, let's go somewhere else. But Trevor was just not interested. He was happy where he was and refused to go with her. So at 7:15 p.m, Jean left the Loughborough Hotel pub, telling Trevor that she was going to the Union instead. So they parted ways outside the Loughborough Hotel pub, with Trevor getting in his car and Jean walking on foot. But Jean never made it to the Union pub. She never made it to any of the other pubs. In fact, no one ever saw her alive again. So what happened between Jean leaving the pub and ending up dead in Suffolk? a place she didn't frequent, she didn't live, and had no friends or family from there. People came forward with things that they'd seen or heard that thought was strange when they'd heard that a body had been found. 3 days after Jean's disappearance, 2 residents were driving along when they noticed a dark-coloured rental van with blacked-out rear windows and an 01 phone number in white. They wondered why a van from London was travelling down this old dirt road. Then at 9:30 a.m, Mr. Fares, who was an estate worker, saw a stranger pass through the Park Farm. He came into the farmyard where he was mixing cow food. It looked like a white Ford, possibly an Escort, and seemed to drive around the building and then up the dirt road through the estate. Now, 2 hours on from Church Farm, another resident was 400 yards from where Jean's body would eventually be found. He heard screams in the distance as he was digging in his garden, and then loud music as if to drown out the screams. He looked up from what he was doing in the garden, shouted his wife to come down and see, but by the time she did, the screams and music had stopped. 12 days later, Jean's body would be discovered 400 yards from this man's property in Suffolk. Police traced Jean's friends and family, her neighbours, asking them for statements, questioning them on when they last saw Jean, what she was like as a person, what she got up to, who she hung around with. Police were very interested in tracing who was driving those 2 vehicles that day, 3 days after Jean had disappeared. They asked people to come forward for elimination purposes. And at one point, police said that they had 5 suspects in mind, including Jean's ex-husband, but none of them were convicted. Jean had no links to Suffolk, but police believed that the killer may have. Andy Guy, Suffolk Police's major crime review and unsolved case manager, said that the case was reviewed in 2009 and 2016 and can do with another full forensic review. DNA technology has moved on, and there were questions I've not got answers to, he said. Mr. Guy said Jean had no connections to Norfolk or Suffolk, but was deposited in a ditch totally out of context. There was no witnesses, no forensic clues to take us anywhere, but there could be somebody out there who knows something, and they could turn things around so quickly. He said that the person who dumped her body most likely had connections to the northeast Suffolk area. The crime featured on BBC One's Crime Watch in May 1989 in an attempt to get more information, but police appeals led to nothing. A lot of Jean's personal possessions were never found. Her coat, one of her stiletto shoes, her bag, the wreath she'd had made for the funeral, and a lot of her jewellery, including a bracelet, rings, a watch, all 22 carat, plus the £300 of Trevor's money that she'd kept safe for him. Her 2 young boys were struggling to come to terms with their mother's death, but were being looked after by relatives. Now, Jean's body had been found partially clothed. She'd been out in the elements for nearly 2 weeks. Her body had started to decompose, and rodents and animals had started to attack it. But back in 1989, DNA was not advanced as it is today. Forensics gained very little from her body or the scene, making it difficult to find a suspect, and hoping that maybe somebody would eventually come forward, or they might be given a name or something to actually go on. But the pathologist would have to review his findings after it was found that she'd also had several blows to the back of her head, which they felt had happened maybe a day or 2 before she was murdered. Now, they felt that the instrument used for the blows for the back of the head was a blunt instrument, but they never found the weapon. They also felt that the cause of death was compression to the neck. In 2019, it was suggested by a former Norfolk Police Intelligence Officer, Chris Clark, that the case could have links to Steve Wright, the infamous Suffolk strangler, who was jailed for the murders of 5 SEX workers back in 2006. The policeman, Mr. Clark, who was investigating cold cases, noted that at the time of Mrs. Kempton's murder, Steve Wright was living in Chislehurst, South London, about 10 miles from Brixton. Steve Wright had previously lived in Suffolk and was known to have a good local knowledge of the area. The timeline and the geological profile, that is where Suffolk police should be looking. However, the murder of Mrs. Kempton remains unsolved. Speaking in 2009, a spokesman for Suffolk police said, "Since the conviction, there have understandably been a number of reports speculating as to Steve Wright's potential involvement in other unsolved cases, missing persons cases, murders, particularly those which occurred within Suffolk and Norfolk. The Norfolk and Suffolk Major Incident Investigation Team have carried out extensive inquiries into Steve Wright's activities prior to the offences in which he was imprisoned for. He has been a consideration in several unsolved reviews across the country, and we remain open to any credible new information provided in this regard," they said. But without DNA evidence linking him to the case, it is now currently only speculation that Steve Wright could be involved in this case. A forensic review was carried out back in 2009 and involved going over every item, and it took months. Mr. Guy revealed that someone came forward with new information about Jeanette, and it was not a significant lead, and appealed for anyone with information to get in touch. At the height of the investigation, there were 5 suspects, but no evidence could be found to prove that either one were responsible. Now, the ex-wife of serial killer and convicted murderer Stephen Wright wants police to reopen the murder case that has baffled police for over 30 years. Diane Cole was with Steve Wright, and she believes he is evil. Diane is convinced that her ex, Stephen Wright, is linked to the death of Jeanette Kempton. Diane has revealed that Steve Wright had links to the Brixton area and where the body was found. Diane said, "I know he was in the London area and he knew the road where she was dumped. He's a nasty, vicious and evil man, and the circumstantial evidence points in his direction. I believe that police should consider him seriously in relation to the murder of Mrs. Kempton." Diane has spoken out after reviewing the evidence put together by cold case expert Chris Clark. The ex-police intelligence officer spoke to Diane, Steve Wright's ex, about his movements in 1989. Stephen Wright married Diane in 1987. Both worked on the QE2, and they also ran the ferryboat inn in Norwich. Steve Wright was known to travel extensively. He regularly drove back to Norwich. The trip used the A12 Wangford Road close to where Jeanette's body was found, and had a London hire van which was spotted turning into the area where the body was found 3 days after Jeanette had disappeared. Steve Wright was known to hire vans and had made trips on the A12 to collect belongings from Norfolk. His ex said, "Jeanette Kempton's murder bears all of the hallmarks of the work of her ex, Stephen Wright. There is similar fact evidence linking Wright to both Brixton and the scene in which she was found." So it sounds like Stephen Wright's ex believes that he was the murderer of Mrs. Kempton and hopes that they will review the case. It also sounds like police have put together some evidence which could link him to the case. Who do you think was responsible for Jeanette Kempton's murder? Do you remember hearing about the case on Crime Watch or on the news back in 1989? Who do you think is responsible for this horrific crime?